The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective, by C.L. Pirkis, author of Lady Lovelace, A Princess's Vengeance. The girl is young, pretty, friendless, and a foreigner, you say, has disappeared completely as if the earth had opened up and received her, said Miss Brooke, making a resume of the facts that Mr. Dyer had been relating to her. Now, will you tell me why 2 days were allowed to elapse before the police were communicated with? Mrs. Druce, the lady to whom Lucy Kerner acted as an amnesis, answered Mr. Dyer, took the matter very calmly at first, and said she felt sure that the girl would write her to a day or so, explaining her extraordinary conduct. Major Druce, her son, the gentleman who came to me this morning, was away from home on a visit when the girl took flight. Immediately upon his return, however, he communicated the fullest particulars to the police. They do not seem to have taken up the case very heartily in Scotland Yard. No, they have as good as dropped it. They advised Major Druce to place the matter in the hands, saying that they considered it a case for a private rather than a police investigation. I wonder what made them come to that conclusion. I think I can tell you, although the Major seemed quite at a loss in the matter. It seems he had a photograph of the missing girl, which he kept in a drawer on his writing table. By the way, I think the young man is a good deal gone with his mind will come here, in spite of his engagement to another lady. Well, this portrait he naturally thought would be most useful in helping us trace the girl, and he went to his drawer for it, intending to take it with him to Scotland Yard. To his astonishment, however, it was nowhere to be seen, and although he at once instituted a rigorous search, and questioned his mother and all the servants in the matter, it was all to no purpose. Loveday thought for a moment. Well, of course, she said presently. That photograph must have been stolen by someone in the house, and equally of course that someone must know more on the matter than he or she cares to avow, and most probably has some interest in throwing obstacles in the way of tracing the girl. At the same time, however, the facts in no way disproves the possibility that a crime, and a very black one, may underlie the girl's disappearance. The Major himself appears confident that a crime of some sort has been committed, and he grew very excited and a little mixed in his statements more than once just now. What sort of woman is the Major's mother? Mrs. Druce? She is rather a well-known personage in certain sets. Her husband died about 10 years ago, and since his death she has posed as a promoter and on all sorts of benevolent, though occasionally somewhat visionary ideas. Theatrical missions, magic lantern and playing card missions, societies for providing perpetual music for the sick poor, for supplying cabmen with comforters, and 100 other similar schemes have in turn occupied her attention. Her house is a rendezvous for faddists of every description. The latest fad, however, seems to have put all others to flight. But a scheme for alleviating the condition of our sisters in the East, so she puts it in her prospectus. In other words, a harem mission on somewhat similar, but I suppose broader lines than the old-fashioned Zenana mission. This harem mission has gathered about her a number of Turkish and Egyptian potentates residents in or visiting London, and has thus incidentally brought about the engagement of her son, Major Druce, with the Princess de Loveday. The princess is a beauty and an heiress, and although of Turkish parentage, has been brought up under European influences in Cairo. Is anything known about the accidents of Mademoiselle Kerner? Very little. She came to Mrs. Druce from a certain Lady Gwyn, who had been brought to her by England as an orphanage for the daughters of jewelers and watchmakers in Chalets and Geneva. Lady Gwyn intended to make her governess to her young children, but saw when she that the girl's good looks had attracted her husband's attention, She thought that the mademoiselle might be useful to her conducting her foreign correspondence. Mrs. Druce accordingly engaged the young lady to act as her secretary in the Ammonius, and appears on the whole to have taken to the girl, and to have been on a pleasant, friendly footing with her. I wonder if the Princess Duleve was on an equally pleasant footing with her when she saw, as no doubt she did, the attention she received from the Major's hands. Mr. Dryer shrugged his shoulders. The Major's suspicions do not point out that direction, in spite of the fact which I've elicited from him the judicious questioning, that the Princess has a violent and jealous temper, and has at times made his life a burden to him. His suspicions center solely upon the certain Hafiz Kazemi, son of a Turkish-Egyptian banker of that name. It was at the house of this Cassini's that the Major first met the Princess, and he states that she and the young Casimini are like brother and sister to each other. He says that this young man has had a run of mother's house and made himself very much at home in it for the past 3 weeks, ever since, in fact, the Princess came to stay with Mrs. Druce, in order to be initiated in the mysteries of English family life. Hafiz Kasimi, according to the mayor's account, fell desperately in love with the little Swiss girl almost at first sight, and pestered her with his attentions, and off and on these appear to have passed hot words between the 2 young men. One could scarcely expect a princess with Eastern blood in her veins to sit quiet, a passive spectator to such a drama of circumstances. Scarcely. The Major, perhaps, hardly takes the princess sufficiently into his reckoning. According to him, Yakasimi was a thorough-going Iago, and he begs to concentrate attentively, entirely on him. Cassimi, he says, has stolen the photograph. Cassimi has invited the girl out of the house on some pretext, perhaps out of the country also, and he suspects that it might be to communicate with the police in Cairo with as little delay as possible. And it hasn't so much as entered his mind that the princess might have had a hand in such a plot as this? Apparently not. I think I told you that Mademoiselle has taken no luggage, not so much as a big handbag with her. Nothing beyond the coat and hat has disappeared from her wardrobe. Her writing desk, and, in fact, all of her boxes and drawers, have been opened and searched, but no letters or papers of any sort have been found that throw any light on her movements. At what hour in the day is the girl supposed to have left the house? No one can say for certain. It is conjectured that it was some time in the afternoon of the 2nd of this month, a week ago today. It was one of Mrs. Druce's big reception days, and with a stream of young people coming and going, a young lady, more or less, leaving the house would scarcely be noticed. I suppose, said Loveday, after a moment's pause, this Princess Duleve has something of a history. One does not often get a Turkish princess in London. Yes, she has a history. She's only remotely connected with the present reigning dynasty in Turkey, and I dare say her princessship has been made the most of. All the same, however, she has had an altogether exceptional career for an Oriental lady. She was left an orphan at an early age, and was consigned to guardianship of the elder Cassimi by her relatives. The Cassimis, both father and son, seem to be very advanced and European in their ideas, and by them she was taken to Cairo for her education. About a year ago they brought her out in London, where she made the acquaintance of Major Druce. The young man, by the way, appears to be rather hot-headed in his love-making, for within 6 weeks of his introduction to her their engagement was announced. No doubt it was Mrs. Druce's fullest approval, for knowing her son's extravagant habits and his numerous debts, it must have been patent to her that a rich wife was a necessity to him. The marriage, I believe, was also to be taking place this season, but taking into consideration the young man's ill-advised attentions to this little Swiss girl, and the fever he is throwing into his search for her, I should say that it was exceedingly doubtful whether Major Druce, sir, wishes to see you, said the clerk at that moment, opening the door leading to the outer office. Very good. Show him in, said Mr. Dyer, then turned to Loveday. Of course, I have spoken to him about you. He is very anxious to take you to his mother's reception this afternoon, and that you may have a look around and he broke off, having to rise and greet Major Druce, who at the moment entered the room. He was a tall, handsome young fellow of about 7 or 8 and 20, well turned out from head to foot, mustache waxed and orchid in his buttonhole, light kid gloves, and patent leather boots. There was assuredly nothing in his appearance to substantiate his statement to Mr. Dyer that he hadn't slept a wink all night, and that another 24 hours of this terrible suspense would send him into his grave. Mr. Dyer introduced Mrs. Brooke, and she expressed her sympathy with him on the painful matter that was filling his thoughts. "This is very good of you, I'm sure," he replied in a slow, soft drawl, not unpleasant to listen to. "My mother receives this afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30, and I shall be very glad if you allow me to introduce you to the inside of our house, and to the very ill-looking set that we have somehow managed to gather about us." "Ill-looking set?" "Yes. Turks, Jews, heretics, infidels, all there. And they're on the incense, too. That's the worst of it. Every week a fresh importation from Cairo." Mrs. Druce is a large-hearted, benevolent woman," interposed Mr. Dyer. "All nationalities gather within her walls." "Was your mother a large-hearted, benevolent woman?" said the young man, turning upon him. "No? Well then, thank Providence that she wasn't. And admit that you know nothing at all in the matter. Miss Brooke," he continued, turning to Loveday, "I've brought round my hansom for you. It's nearly 4:30 now, and it's a good 20 minutes' drive from here to Portland Place. If you're ready, I'm at your service." Major Druce's hansom was, like himself in all respects, well turned out, and the india-rubber tires round its wheels allow an easy flow of conversations to be kept up during the 20 minutes' drive from Lynch Court to Portland Place. The Major led off the talk in frank and easy fashion. "My mother," he said, "prides herself on being cosmopolitan in her tastes, and now we have a very cosmopolitan indeed. Even our servants respect divers nationalities. The butler is French, and 2 footmen Italians, and the maids, I believe, are some of them German, some Irish, and I've no doubt if you penetrated the kitchen quarters, you'll find the staff there composed of part of the Scandinavians and part of the South Sea Islanders. The other quarters of the globe you will find fully represented in the drawing-room." Loveday had a direct question to ask. "Are you certain that Mademoiselle Kerner had no friends in England?" she said. "I'm positive. She hadn't a friend in the world outside my mother's four walls, poor child. She told me more than once she was like Sweet Solitaire." He broke off for a moment, as if to overcome a sad memory, then added, "But I'll put a bullet into him, take my word for it, if she isn't found within another 24 hours. Personally, I should prefer settling the brute in that fashion to handing him over to the police." His face flushed a deep red. There came a sudden flash to his eyes. But for all that, his voice was as soft and slow and unemotional, as though he were talking of nothing more serious than bringing down a partridge. There fell a brief pause, then Loveday asked another question. "Is Mademoiselle Catholic or Protestant? Can you tell me?" The Major thought for a moment. Then he replied, "Upon my word, I don't know. She used sometimes to attend a little church in South Saville Street. I walked with her occasionally to the church door, but I couldn't for the life of me say whether it was Catholic, Protestant, or pagan place of worship. But you haven't think those confounded priests have—" "Here we are at Portland Place," interrupted Loveday. "Mrs. Druce's rooms are already full to—" judge from that long line of carriages. Miss Brooke, said the Major suddenly, bethinking himself of his responsibilities. How am I to introduce you? What role will you take up this afternoon? Pose as a faddist of some sort, if you want to win my mother's heart. What do you say to having started a grand scheme for supplying Hottentots and coffers with eyeglasses? My mother would swear eternal friendship with you at once. Don't introduce me at all at first, answered Loveday. Get me into some quiet corner where I can see without being seen. Later on in the afternoon, when I have had time to look around a little, I will tell you whether it will be necessary to introduce me or not. It will be a mob this afternoon, no mistake, said Major Druce, as side by side they entered the house. Do you hear that fizzing and clucking behind us? That's Arabic. You'll get in whiffs between gusts of French and German all this afternoon. The Egyptian contingent seems to be in full force today. I don't see any Choctaw Indians, but I no doubt they'll send their representative later on. Come in at this side door, and we'll work our way around that big palm. My mother is sure to see at the principal doorway. The drawing rooms were packed from end to end, and Major Druce's progress as he headed Loveday through the crowd was impeded by handshaking and interchange of civilities with his mother's guests. Eventually, a big palm standing in a Chinese cistern was reached, and from there, half screened from view by its graceful branches, he placed a chair for Miss Brooke. From this quiet nook, and now and again the crowd parted, Loveday could command a fair view of both drawing rooms. Don't distract attention to me by standing at my elbow, she whispered to the Major. He answered her whisper with another. There's the beast Iago, I mean. Do you see him? He's standing talking to that fair, handsome woman in a pale green dress with a picture hat. She's Lady Gwen. And there's my mother. And there's Dolly, the princess, alone on the sofa. You can't see her now for the crowd. Yes, I'll go, but if you want me, just nod to me and I'll understand. It was easy to see what had brought such a fashionable crowd to Mrs. Druce's rooms that afternoon. Every caller, as soon as she had shaken hands with the hostess, passed on to the princess's sofa, and there waited patiently till opportunity presented itself for an introduction to her Eastern Highness. Loveday found it impossible to get more than a mere glimpse of her, and so transferred her attention to Mr. Hafiz Cassini, who had been referred to in such unceremonious language by Major Druce. He was a swarthy, well-featured man with bold black eyes and lips that had a habit of parting now and again, not to smile, but as if to show no other purpose than to show a double row of gleaming white teeth. The European dress he wore seemed to accord ill with the man, and Loveday could fancy that those black eyes and that double row of white teeth would have better be shown an advantage beneath a turban or fez cap. From Cassini, her eyes wandered to Mrs. Druce, a tall, stout woman dressed in black velvet, and with her hair mounted high on her head, that had an appearance of being either bleached or powdered. She gave Loveday the impression of being that essentially modern product of modern society, the woman who combines in one person the hard-working philanthropist and the hard-working woman of fashion. As rivals began to slacken, she left her post near the door and began to make her round of the room. From snatches of talk that came to her where she sat, Loveday could gather that, with one hand, as it were, this energetic lady was organizing a grand charity concert, and with the others pushing the interests of a big ball that was shortly to be given by the officers of her son's regiment. It was a hot June day, and in spite of the closed blinds and open windows, the room was stifling to a degree. The butler, a small, dark, slight Frenchman, made his way through a throng to a window at Loveday's right hand, to see if a little more air could be admitted. Major Druce followed on his heels to Loveday's side. "Will you come into the next room and have some tea?" he asked. "I'm sure you must be nearly suffocated here." He broke off, then added in a lower tone, I hope you have kept your eyes on the beast. Did you ever in your life see a more repulsive-looking animal? Loveday took his questions in their order. No tea, thank you, she said, but I shall be glad if you will tell your butler to bring me a glass of water. There he is, at your elbow. Yes, off and on, I have seen studying Mr. Cassimi, and I must admit I do not like his smileless smile. The butler brought the water. The Major, much to his annoyance, was seized upon simultaneously by two ladies, one eager to know if any tidings had been received by Mademoiselle Cunyer, and the other anxious to learn if a distinguished president to the harem mission had been decided upon. Soon after 6, the rooms began to thin somewhat, and presentations to the princess ceasing, Loveday was able to get a full view of her. She presented a striking picture, seated half-reclining on a sofa, with two white-robed, dark-skinned Egyptian maidens standing beside her. A more unfortunate subject than Dolly could scarcely have been found by the Major for this oriental beauty, with her olive complexion and her flashing eyes and extravagant richness of attire. Queen of Sheba would be more appropriate, thought Loveday. She turns a commonplace sofa into a throne, and I should say makes every one of those ladies feel as if she ought to have donned court dress and plumes for the occasion. It was difficult for her, from where she sat, to follow the details of the princess's dress. She could only see that a quantity of soft orange-tinted silk was wound about her upper part of her arms, and fell from her shoulders like drooping wings, and that here and there jewels flashed out from the folds. Her thick black hair was loosely knotted, and kept in its place by jeweled pins and a bandeau of pearls, and similar bandeaus adorned her slender throat and wrists. Are you lost in admiration? Said the Major, once more at her elbow, in the slightest sarcastic tone. That sort of thing is very taking and effective at first, but after a time... He did not finish his sentence, shrugged his shoulders, and walked away. 6:30 chimed in a small clock on the bracket. Carriage after carriage was rolling away from the door now, and progress on the stairs was rendered difficult by a descending crowd. 7:15 struck, and the last handshaking had been done through, and Mrs. Druce, looking hot and tired, had sunk into a chair at the princess's right hand, bending slightly forward to render conversation with her lady. At the princess's left hand, Lady Gwyn had taken a chair, and sat in converse with Hafiz Cassimi, who stood behind her. Evidently, these four were on very easy and intimate terms with each other. Lady Gwyn had tossed her big picture hat on the chair at her far left hand, and was fanning herself with a palm leaf. Mrs. Druce, beckoning to the butler, desired him to bring them some claret cup from the refreshment room. No one seemed to observe Loveday seated in her nook beside the big palm. She signaled to the Major, who stood looking discontentedly from her to the windows. That is a most interesting group, she said. Now, if you like, you may introduce me to your mother. Oh, with pleasure. Under what name? He asked. Under my own, she answered. And please be very distinct in pronouncing it. Raise your voice slightly so that every one of those persons may hear it. And then please add my profession, and say I am here at your request to investigate the circumstances connected with Mademoiselle Cunyer's disappearance. Major Druce looked astounded. But, he stammered, have you seen anything, found anything out? If not, don't you think it'd be better to preserve your incognita a little longer? Don't stop to ask questions, said Loveday sharply. Now, this very minute, do what I ask you, or the opportunity will be gone. The Major, without further demur, escorted Loveday across the room. The conversation between the four intimate friends had now become general and animated, and he had to wait for a moment or so before they could get an opportunity to speak to his mother. During that minute, Loveday stood a little to his rear, with Lady Gwyn and Cassimi at her right hand. Want to introduce you to this lady, said the Major, with a pause in the talk that gave him this opportunity. This is Miss Loveday Brooke, a lady detective, and she is here at my request to investigate the circumstances connected with the disappearance of Mademoiselle Conyers. He said the words slowly and distinctly. There, he said to himself complacently as he ended. If I had been reading the church lessons in church, I couldn't have been more emphatic. A blank silence for a moment fell upon the group, and even the butler, just then entered with the claret cup, came to a standstill at the door. Then simultaneously, a flash glanced from Mrs. Druce to Lady Gwyn, from Lady Gwyn to Mrs. Druce, and then also simultaneously, both ladies rested, though only for an instant, on the big picture hat lying on the chair. Lady Gwyn started to her feet and seized her hat, adjusting it without so much as a glance of a mirror. "I must go at once, this very minute," she said. "I promised Charlie I would be back soon after 6. Now it is past 7. Mr. Cassini, will you take me down to my carriage?" And with the most hurried of leave-takings to the princess and the hostess, the lady swept out of the room, followed by Mr. Cassini. The butler, still standing at the door, drew back to allow the lady to pass, and then, claret cup and all, followed her out of the room. Mrs. Druce drew a long breath and then bowed formally to Loveday. "I was a little taken by surprise," she began. But here the princess rose suddenly to the sofa. "Mon je fatigué," she said in excellent French to Mrs. Druce, and she too swept out of the room, throwing as she passed what seemed to Loveday's a slightly scornful glance towards the mayor. Her two attendants, one carrying her fan and the other her reclining cushions, followed. Mrs. Druce again turned to Loveday. "Yes, I must confess I am a little taken by surprise," she said, with her manner thawing slightly. "I am not accustomed to the presence of detectives in my house, but now tell me what you propose doing. How do you mean to begin your investigation? By going over the house and looking in all the corners, or by cross-questioning the servants? Forgive my asking, but I really am at quite a loss. I haven't the remotest idea how such investigations are generally conducted." "I do not propose to do much in the way of investigation tonight," answered Loveday, as formally as she had been addressed, "for I have very important business to transact before 8 o'clock this evening. I shall ask you to allow me to see Mademoiselle Curran's room 10 minutes after. 10 minutes there will be sufficient. After that, I do not think I need further trouble you." "Certainly, by all means," answered Miss Druce. "You'll find the room exactly as Lucy left it. Nothing has been disturbed." She turned to the butler, who had by this time returned, and said presently, with the claret cup, and in French, desired him to summon her maid and tell her to show Miss Brooke to Mademoiselle Turner's room. 10 minutes that Loveday had said would suffice for her survey of this room extended themselves to 15, but the extra 5 minutes assuredly were not expended by her in the investigation of drawers and boxes. The maid, a pleasant, well-spoken young woman, jingled her keys and opened every lock, and seemed not at all disinclined to enter into the light gossip that Loveday contrived to get going. She answered freely a variety of questions that Loveday put to her respecting Mademoiselle and her general habits, and from Mademoiselle the talk drifted to other members of the Mrs. Druce household. If Loveday had, as she had stated, important business to transact that evening, she certainly set about it in a strange fashion. After she quitted Mademoiselle's room, she went straight out of the house without leaving a message of any sort for either Mr. or Major Druce. She walked the length of Portland Place in leisurely fashion, and then, having first ascertained that her movements were not being watched, she called a hansom, and desired the man to drive her to Mademoiselle Celine's, a fashionable milliner's in Old Bond Street. At Mademoiselle Celine's she spent close upon half an hour, giving many and minute directions of making of a hat, which, assuredly, when finished, would compare with nothing in the way of millinery that she had ever put on her head. From Mademoiselle's saloon, the hansom conveyed her to an undertaker's shop at the corner of South Saville Street, and here she spent a brief 10 minutes in conversation with the undertaker himself in his little black parlor. From the undertaker's, she drove home to her rooms in Gower Street, and then, before she divested herself of hat and coat, she wrote a brief note to Major Druce requesting him to meet her on the following morning at Eglace's, the confectioner's, in the South Saville Street, at 9 o'clock, punctually. This note she committed to the charge of the cab driver, desiring him to deliver it at Portland Place on his way back to his stand. "They have queer ways of doing things, these people," said the Major, as he opened and read the note. "I suppose I must be kept the appointment, confound it. I can't see that she possibly found anything by just sitting still in the corner for a couple of hours. And I'm confident she didn't give that beast Cassini 1/4 of the attention she bestowed on the other people." In spite of his grumbling, however, the Major kept his appointment. At 9 o'clock the next morning, she saw him shaking hands with Miss Brooke at the Eglace's doorstep. "This Mr. Handsome," she said to him. "I only want you to come in for a few doors down the streets, to the French Protestant church, to which you have sometimes escorted Mademoiselle Contia." At the church door, Loveday paused a moment. "Before we enter," she said, "I want you to promise that whatever you may see going on in there, however greatly you may be surprised, you will make no disturbance, not so much as open your lips till we come out." The Major, not a little bewildered, gave his required promise, and side by side the two entered the church. It was little more than a big room. At the farther end, in the middle of the nave, stood the pulpit, and immediately behind this was a low platform, enclosed by a brass rail. Behind the brass rail, a little black Geneva gown stood in the pasture of the church, and before him, on cushions, kneeled two persons, a man and a woman. These two persons, and an old man, the converter, formed the whole of the congregation. The position of the church amid shops and narrow backyards had necessitated the filling of every one of its windows with stained glass. It was, consequently, so dim that, coming in from the outside glare of the sunlight, the Major found it difficult to make out what was going on in the farther end. The verger came forward and offered to show him to a seat. Loveday shook her head, and they would be leaving in a minute, she said, and would prefer standing where they were. The Major began to take in the situation. "Why, they're being married," he said in a low whisper. "What on earth have you brought me here in for?" Loveday laid a finger on her lips and frowned severely at him. The marriage service came to an end. The pastor extended his black-gowned arms like the wings of a bat and produced the benediction. The man and woman rose from their knees and proceeded to follow him to the vestry. The woman was neatly dressed in a long dove-colored traveling gown. She wore a large hat from which fell a white gossamer veil that completely hid her face from view. The man was small, dark, and slight, and as he passed on the vestry beside his bride, the Major at once identified him as his mother's butler. "Why, that's Lebrun," he said in a loud whisper before. Said in a still louder whisper than before. "Why, the name of all what's wonderful, have you brought me here to see that fellow married?" "You'd better come outside if you can't keep quiet," she said severely, and leading the way out of the church as she spoke. Outside, South Saville Street was busy with early morning traffic. "Let us go back to Eglace's," said Loveday, "and have some coffee. I'll explain to you there all of you are wishing to know." But before the coffee could be brought to them, the Major had asked at least 24 questions. Loveday put them all on one side. "All in good time," she said. "You're leaving out the most important question of all. You have no curiosity to who was the bride that LeBron was chosen. Don't suppose it concerns me in the slightest degree, he answered indifferently. But since you wish me to ask the question, who was she? Lucy Cunningham, lately your mother's amnesius. The, cried the Major, jumping to his feet and uttering an exclamation that must be indicated by a blank. Take it calmly, said Loveday. Don't rave. Sit down and I'll tell you all about it. Now it is not the doing of your friend Cassini. You have no need to threaten to put a bullet in him. The girl has married Lebrun of her own free will. No one has forced her onto it. Lucy has married Lebrun of her own free will? He echoed, growing very white and taking the chair which faced Loveday at the little table. Will you have sugar? Asked Loveday, stirring the coffee which the waiter at that moment brought. Yes, I repeat, she presently resumed. Lucy has married Lebrun of her own free will, although I conjecture she might not, perhaps, be quite so willing to crown his happiness if Princess Tileve had not made it greatly her interest to do so. Dolly made it her interest to do so? Again echoed the Major. Do not interrupt me with exclamations. Let me tell you the story in my own fashion, and then you may ask as many questions as you please. Now, to begin at the beginning, Lucy became engaged to Lebrun within a month of her coming to your mother's house, but she carefully kept the secret from everyone, even from the servants, until a month ago, when she mentioned the fact in confidence to Mrs. Druce, in order to defend herself from the charge of having sought to attract your attention. There was nothing surprising in this engagement. They were both lonely and in a foreign land, and spoke the same language, and no doubt had many things in common, and although chance has lifted Lucy somewhat out of her station, she really belongs to the same class in life as Lebrun. Their love-making appears to have run along smoothly enough until you came home on leave, and the girl's pretty face attracted your attention. Your evident admiration for her disturbed the equanimity of the princess, who saw your devotion to herself wanting. Of Lebrun, who fancied Lucy's manner to him had changed, of your mother, who was anxious that you should make a suitable marriage. Also, additional complications arose from the fact that your attentions to the little Swiss girl had drawn Mr. Cassini's notice to her numerous attractions, and there was danger of you two men posing as rivals. At this juncture, Lady Gwyn, as an intimate friend, and one who had herself suffered the twinge of heartache at Mademoiselle's account, was taken into your mother's confidence, and the three ladies in council decided that Lucy, in some fashion, must be got out of the way before you and Mr. Cassini came to an open breach, and you had spoilt your matrimonial prospects. Here the Major made a slightly impatient movement. Loveday went on. It was a princess who solved the question how this was to be done. Fair Rosamunds are no longer put out of the way by a cup of cold poison. Gold guineas do the thing far more easily and innocently. The princess expressed her willingness to bestow £1,000 on Lucy on the day that she married Lebrun, and to set her up afterwards in a fashionable milliner in Paris. After this wonderful effort, everything else became a mere matter of detail. The main thing was to get the damsel out of the way without your being able to trace her, perhaps work on her feelings and induce her, at the last moment, to throw over Lebrun. Your absence from home on 3 days' visit gave them a wished-for opportunity. Lady Gwyn took her milliner into confidence. Mademoiselle consented to receive Lucy into her house, seclude her in a room on the upper floor, at the same time give her an insight into the profession of a fashionable milliner. The rest I think you know. Lucy quietly walks out of the house one afternoon, taking no luggage, calling no cab, and therefore cutting off one very obvious means of being traced. Madame Celie receives and hides her, not a difficult feat to accomplish in London, more especially if the one to be hidden is a foreigner Lucis, who is seldom seen out of doors, and who leaves no photograph behind her. I suppose it was Lebrun who had the confounded cheek to go I suppose it was Lebrun who had the confounded cheek to go into my drawer and appropriate that photograph. I wish it had been Cassini. I could have kicked him, but it makes one feel rather small to have posed as a rival to one's mother's butler. I think you may congratulate yourself that Lebrun did nothing worse than to go to your drawer and appropriate that photograph. I never saw a man bestow a more deadly look of hatred than he threw at you yesterday in your mother's drawing room. It was that look of hatred that first drew my attention to the man, set me on the track that was ended in the Swiss Protestant church this morning. Ah, let me hear about that. Let me have the links in the chain, one by one, as you came upon them, said the Major. He was still pale, almost as the marble table at which they sat, but his voice had gone back to its normal, slow drawl. With pleasure. The look from Lebrun threw at you as he crossed the room to open the window was link number one. I saw the look. I said to myself, there is someone in the corner who has hatred toward the man, deadly hatred. Then you came forward to speak to me, and I saw that it was you that the man was ready to murder if opportunity offered. After this, I scrutinized him closely. Not a detail of his features or his dress escaped me, and I noticed, among other things, that on the fourth finger of his left hand, half hidden by a more prestigious ring, was an old-fashioned, curious-looking silver one. That silver ring was his link number 2 in the chain. Ah, I suppose you asked for that glass of water on purpose to get a closer view of the ring. I did. I found it was a generous ring of ancient make, like which I had not seen since I was a child and played with one, that my old Swiss bonnet used to wear. Now, I must tell you a little about Genevieve history, before I can make you understand how important the link that silver ring was to me. In Charlotte, the town in which Lucy was born, and her father had kept a watchmaker's shop, has long been famous for its jewelry and watchmaking. The two trades, however, were not combined until about 100 years ago, when the corporation of the town passed a law agreeing that they should unite in one guild for their common good. To celebrate this amalgamation of interests, the jewelers fabricated a certain number of silver rings consisting of a plain band of silver in which 2 hands in relief clasped each other. These rings were distributed among the members of the guild, and as time has gone on, they've become scarce and valuable as relatives of past. In certain families, they've been handed down as heirlooms, and have frequently done duty as betrothal rings, clasped hands, no doubt suggesting their suitability for the purpose. Now, when I saw such a ring on Lebrun's finger, I naturally guessed from whom he had received it, and at once classed his interests with those of your mother and the princess, and looked upon him as a possible coadjutor. What made you throw the brute Cassini altogether out of your reckoning? I did not do so at this stage of the events, only, so to speak, marked him as doubtful, and kept my eye on him. I determined to try an experiment that I have never before attempted in my work. You know what an experiment is. I saw 5 persons, Mrs. Druce, the princess, Lady Gwyn, Mr. Cassini, and Lebrun, all in the room within a few yards of each other, and I asked you to take them by surprise and announce my name and profession, so that every one of those 5 persons could hear you. You did. I could not for the life of me make out what was your motive for doing such. My motive for doing so was simply, as it were, to raise a sudden cry. The enemy is upon you, to set every one of those 5 persons guarding the weak point. That is, if they had one. I'll draw your attention to what followed. Mr. Cassini remained nonchalant and impassive. Your mother and Lady Gwyn exchanged glances, and then both simultaneously threw a nervous look at Lady Gwyn's hat lying on the chair. Now, as I had stood waiting to be introduced to Mrs. Druce, I casually read the name of Madame Celine's on the lining of the hat. I at once concluded that Madame Celine Must be a very weak point indeed. A conclusion that was confirmed when Lady Gwyn hurriedly seized her hat and hurriedly departed. Then the princess scarcely less abrupt rose and left the room, and the Baron, on the point of entering, quitted it also. When he returned 5 minutes later with a claret cup, he had removed the ring from his finger, so I had little doubt where his weak point lay. "It's wonderful. It's like a fairy tale," drawled the Major. "Pray, go on." "After this," Loveday continued, "my work became very simple. I did not care 2 straws for seeing Mademoiselle's room, but I cared very much to have a talk with Mrs. Druce's maid. From her I elicited the important fact that Lebrun was leaving very unexpectedly on the following day, and that his boxes were packed and labelled for Paris. After I left your house, I drove to Madame Celine's, and there, as a sort of entrance fee, I ordered an elaborate hat. I praised freely that the hats they had on feel, and while giving minute instructions as to the one I required, I extracted information that Madame Celine had recently taken on a new milliner and had a very great artistic skill. Upon this, I asked permission to see this new milliner and give her special instructions concerning my hat. The request was referred to Madame Celine, who appeared much ruffled by it, and informed me that it would be quite useless for me to see this new milliner, that she could execute no more orders, as she was leaving the next day for Paris, where she intended opening an establishment on her own account. Now you see the point at which I had arrived. There was Lebrun, and there was this new milliner, each leaving for Paris on the same day. It was not unreasonable to suppose that they start in company, and that before so going, a little ceremony might be gone through in the Swiss Protestant church that Mademoiselle occasionally attended. This conjecture sent me to the undertaker at South Seville Street, who combines with his undertaking the office of little verger with the local church. From him I learned that the marriage was to take place at the church at 9:15 the next morning, and that the names of the contracting parties were Pierre Lebrun and Lucie Signon.
Cunin?
Yes, that's the girl's real name. Seems Lady Gwyn rechristened her Cunnier, because she said the English pronunciation of Quinn and granted it on her ear. People would insist upon adding the G after the N. She introduced her as Mrs. Druce under the name of Cunnier, forgetting perhaps the girl's real name, or else thinking it a matter of no importance. But this fact, no doubt, considerably lessened Lebrun's fear of detection, procuring his lessons and transmitting it to the Swiss pastor. Perhaps you are a little surprised at my knowledge of the facts I related to you at the beginning of this conversation. I got them through Lebrun this morning. At 8:30 I went down to the church and found him there, awaiting his new bride. He grew terribly excited at seeing me, and thought I was going to bring you down to him and upset his wedding arrangements at the last moment. I assured him to the contrary, and his version of the facts I have handed on to you. Should, however, any details of the story seem to you to be lacking, I have no doubt that Mrs. Druce or the princess will supply them. Now that all necessity for secrecy has come to an end."
The Major drew on his gloves. His colour had come back to him, and he had resumed his easy suavity of manner. "I don't think," he said slowly, "I'll trouble my mother or the princess, and I shall be glad if you have the opportunity, if you will make people understand that I only moved in the matter at all out of mere kindness to a young and friendless foreigner."